Good morning. Great. So this is exciting for me. One of the things that I'm a big advocate for is open source and open source software. And I've been part of that community for a very, very long time, going back to a date when people thought, oh, you know, this is just a hobby thing. It can never really be, it'll never really work commercially. And people said, no, there's a whole host of new business models that don't involve just, I'm talking many years ago, don't involve just putting software on a shelf to sell, but in fact providing all the services and support around that. Nowadays, of course, that's very, very common. And so it's really exciting to see companies like Alfresco in the marketplace doing really interesting things and doing it on the basis of a very open and very community approach. So it's good to be here. So the original vision behind Wikipedia is for all of us to imagine a world in which every single person on the planet is given free access to the sum of all human knowledge. This is obviously a very big ambition, but I think that this big ambition is part of what has made Wikipedia successful. When you want to motivate people to do something really interesting, it's better to have a big, almost impossible goal, but that seems like it's really worth doing, rather than some small little boring goals. And so what we're going to see through the story of Wikipedia is how open source and open content is changing the internet and also changing the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about community governance and what are some of the new challenges that we've overcome within our community, some of the lessons that I see for other kinds of organizations and communities based on the success of our work. So we've been around now for just over 12 and a half years. And in that period of time, the community has written over 27 million articles. This is a very large encyclopedia, if you think about it. To give you some context, Britannica has about 66,000 articles and is actually, in fact, a very small work compared to Wikipedia. This is 27 million articles, but also we're across 285 different languages. Now, for me, this number 285, this is the official number. This is the official number of websites that we have set up. But I actually think this is a little bit optimistic. And when we really look at the key stats, what we'll see is a few very, very large languages and a lot of large languages, and then it tends to get a lot smaller after that. So just to have a little bit of local context, Spanish is the 8th largest, just recently passed over 1 million entries. But we now have 8 languages that have at least 1 million entries. We've got 46 languages that have 100,000 entries. And we have 120 that have at least 10,000. And then finally, 223 languages have between 1,000 and 10,000. Now, these are the small languages of Wikipedia. These are the ones where whenever I see there's 1,000 articles, I know there's a small community there. It's usually 5 to 10 people who are really, really active, and another 20 to 30 who are somewhat active. And that's the point where I really feel like a project is launched. They've come together and they've started to think of themselves as a community and think about how can we get press coverage in our language? How can we get more volunteers? Who are the academics we should approach to help us and support us? Just to give some additional context here about the Spanish language situation. The interesting, of course, Spanish is a global language spoken many, many, many places around the world. But one of the more interesting things about the Wikipedia movement is how some of the smaller regional languages have incredibly strong communities. The Catalan Wikipedia is really a shining example, as is the Basque language Wikipedia, where if you look at the per capita number of articles, it's much higher than most of the largest languages of Wikipedia. And the reason is, of course, Catalan is a language that as people are very passionate about. They feel that it's been, in the past, it was definitely under threat. Even today, it's a language that people really want to have thrive and grow. And so it's amazing to me. It's something that I never predicted. That the smaller regional languages are among the strongest languages of Wikipedia. And this is true everywhere. We see it in Welsh in the UK and so forth. These languages are always doing really, really well. So whenever we talk about the global nature of Wikipedia and how we're in all these languages all around the world, one of the things that people are always curious about is Chinese language. How do we do in China? As is well known, China has the strongest internet censorship in the world. They have tens of thousands of people whose job it is to monitor the internet and block things and censor things. And we were completely banned in China for about 3 years. We have always taken the stand that access to information is a fundamental human right. So we never cooperate with censorship. This is a very important principle for us in our community. But we can't stop the Chinese from filtering their own network. And so while we don't go into China, we don't cooperate, we do have a very large Chinese language community. It's around the 12th largest language of Wikipedia. Around the time of the Beijing Olympics, the Chinese decided to open up quite a bit. So they unblocked the BBC, they unblocked Wikipedia. It was very fortunate timing for me. I was on my way to meet the minister, and they unblocked Wikipedia. So instead of going there to ask them to unblock, I was able to thank them for unblocking Wikipedia. But today, we're generally open in China. They filter certain pages, so they block pages about Liu Xiaobo, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his democracy activism in China. They block Ai Weiwei, who's an artist who's always irritating them, making fun of the Chinese government. They block things having to do with Tibetan independence or Taiwanese independence. It's all the topics that you would expect, the real hot-button topics. But by and large, the vast majority of Wikipedia is available in China. Because of the blocking, though, we were blocked for such a long time, then our traffic is not nearly as high in China as it is in many places around the world. When I was in a discussion, I've been twice to see the minister who's in charge of censoring the internet there. He's been twice to America to visit with me. Whenever I talk to him, I always try to talk about how, when I talk about our traffic numbers, I say it's unfortunate that China is so far behind in Wikipedia, because he wants me to say that Wikipedia is far behind in China. So it's a little playing around there. But one of the interesting things about China is that although our current traffic, most markets around the world, we're in the top 5 of all websites, almost always in the top 10. But in China, the best numbers I have, we're just barely in the top 50. So the truth is our traffic is much lower in China than in a lot of other places, partly because of that 3-year block period when we didn't grow and we didn't have a lot of public recognition there. However, we have had a certain kind of cultural impact in China. Someone sent me this menu, if you can read it there. Wikipedia fried with eggs. Here's another one, beef brisket and Wikipedia flavor. Somebody sent me this one and they said, Jimmy, what does this mean? And I wrote back and I said, I have no idea. But I said, I know who will know. So I contacted the Beijing area Wikipedians, and we've always had a strong community in China. Even when we were banned, there were these really great people who knew how to get around the firewall, and they were volunteers and they worked in Wikipedia. So I said to them, what does this mean? Here's the Wikipedia bread company. It's like a Starbucks. It's actually quite nice. They emailed me back and they said, Jimmy, we have no idea. All of these are different food items, different translations. So the only thing we've been able to figure out is that, I like it with pimento, spicy myself. The only thing we've been able to figure out is, of course, when you go to a search engine and you type in anything, what's the first thing that comes up? Wikipedia. And this was around the time, these started to appear around the time of the Beijing Olympics when millions of foreigners were coming for the first time to China. But even today, still, these continue to pop up. It's like a strange thing in China, Steam Eggs with Wikipedia, where when they translate menus, they come up with Wikipedia quite often. So the truth is we're doing okay in China. The current situation is a bit of a standoff. We don't think they're going to completely block us again in China. However, we also don't think they're going to suddenly open up and allow all the content of China. So we're in a bit of a stalemate. I am optimistic about the long run in China. I think that the government there understands that the current situation is not sustainable in the long run. The truth is, what they know today, it's not like any educated person doesn't know that Liu Xiaobo won the Nobel Peace Prize. They're not keeping that information from people. All they're doing is putting a chilling effect on the domestic blogging conversation. So bloggers don't talk about Liu Xiaobo because they know if they do, they'll have their blogs deleted. But it looks sillier and sillier to people as time goes on. And the one thing that tyranny really can't survive is being mocked. And so there's a lot of funny things that the Chinese do. When Liu Xiaobo won the Nobel Peace Prize, there was a great sort of PR move that they made at the Nobel ceremony. They had an empty chair for him because he wasn't allowed to come to receive the Nobel Prize. And so this picture of the empty chair was broadcast around the world. It was a very, very famous picture. And within China, what people did, they couldn't post that picture because that would be detected by the censors and blocked, but they changed their profile picture to an empty chair. They would just take a picture of a chair at home. And it was a way of quietly saying, this is stupid, right? This is really silly. You can't stop us from knowing this. Here's a picture of an empty chair to prove it. So I'm optimistic. I think the young generation in China is going to really dramatically change things, but it's going to take a while. The Chinese move very, very slowly. So this kind of global nature is something that's really new, and I think we're really at the forefront of being, the most global. A number of studies have looked at the Wikipedia website. It's the most linguistically diverse website in the world, as we're in all these languages. But one of the things that we're always wondering about is how does the content differ across different languages and different cultures? Well, there's some good news first. The good news is, although you can get this idea that, there's certain topics that people of different cultures are never going to agree on, it turns out that we do a really good job of having very neutral information. And then even in languages like Hebrew and Arabic, where there are specific points of very strong contention, both the Hebrew and the Arabic versions tend to be quite calm to explain both perspectives. You can find examples of bias in Wikipedia, there's no question about it. But it actually turns out that on the real hot button issues is where we actually shine, that people of different viewpoints can come together and work together and present something that may not answer the question, but at least presents the question in a way that both sides can say, yeah, this is fair, this is interesting, this is worthwhile. But when we look at what people are reading, the actual percentages, the numbers on what people are reading, we do see some differences. And this is an amusing chart. I apologize, it's probably a little bit hard to see, but the languages here are English, Chinese, Japanese, French, German, Russian, and Spanish. And so when you take a look at this, when you look at the first thing most people see is the big green bar, pop culture in Japan. So if you know anything about Japan, this makes perfect sense. The Japanese love pop culture. They love American pop culture. They love English pop culture. They love their homegrown Japanese pop culture. So it's a big part of what people are reading about on Japanese Wikipedia. Some of the other ones to notice is that the Germans are the most interested in geography. Not sure that's a good thing. Oh, I don't make that joke when I'm in Germany. They're still a little touchy about that, but most people enjoy it. Spanish Wikipedia, very strong in science and tech. I think that's quite interesting. The other one that people notice is that sex. And sex is really among the top topics everywhere except for French and Spanish Wikipedia. And I was a little puzzled by this until someone explained it to me that this is because the French and the Spanish are actually having sex. And the rest of us are just reading about it on the internet. So anyway, it is very amusing, and it is interesting to look at what's different in different cultures and what people are reading. But actually, when you dig a little deeper, some of the differences that we see, if you go down to a really fine-grained look, actually end up being more similarities than differences. So I always like the example, if you look up the traffic statistics on Nick Clegg, who is the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, most of the people who are reading about Nick Clegg are in the UK. Whereas if you look at David Cameron, the Prime Minister, he would tend to be read more globally because he's known on the global stage. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that British people are different from Americans, because Americans would be reading about their local politicians, local governors, local mayors. And so what we see is that even when we see differences in what people are reading, there's an underlying similarity. People like to read about their own countries, geographical things, their own history, their own politicians, things that actually enter their lives and really matter to them. So as I say, we've been around for 12 and a half years. We've become incredibly successful. We have, according to the latest ComScore numbers, 516 million unique visitors a month. So this is a massive number of people who are using Wikipedia every month. These are the ComScore numbers we actually think that our internal server logs show much higher numbers, and one of the reasons for that is that we are very strong globally across the entire world, where ComScore has certain strengths and weaknesses around the world. ComScore's measurement in China is not as good as it could be. ComScore's measurement in Africa is not as good as it should be. ComScore does a really great job, but of course, as a business, their main job is measuring traffic for the purpose of advertising and advertisers. So in markets that have very small advertising markets, it just doesn't pay for them to really invest the resources in doing super accurate measurements there. We, on the other hand, we're in all these markets, and what we see is, maybe 700,000 monthly visitors. But we just go with the official numbers because that's plenty. And one of our goals is to increase globally the number of people who are using Wikipedia. And one of the interesting things about us, perhaps the most amazing thing, is that we're a nonprofit organization. So we're a charity with a mission to give a free encyclopedia to everyone. And as a result of that, we care just as much about our next million users in sub-Saharan Africa as we care about our next million users in the United States, because that is our mission, and we're a very mission-driven organization. So one of the things that we're doing we call Wikipedia Zero. So this is a program encouraging mobile providers to give free access, i.e. no data charges, to Wikipedia. We've done this with a number of mobile carriers, Orange, Telenor, etc. And currently, the last numbers that they gave me the other day, in theory, 400 million people now have access to Wikipedia through their mobile devices in the developing world with no data charges. Now, we don't see that kind of traffic yet. So the 400 million number is not how many people we're seeing. It's how many people are customers of providers who offer access in this format. Most of those customers don't yet have a smartphone, so their ability to access is quite low. But the growth of smartphones in the developing world is phenomenal. It's coming faster than almost anyone realizes. And so we started doing these kinds of deals and announcing them, and it was in the press. And then something really amazing happened. There was a group of young kids in Joe Slovo Park, which is a slum in South Africa, who launched a petition asking the mobile providers in South Africa to offer Wikipedia Zero. And I just want to show you a video of these young people because I just think it's just remarkable. And by the way, this is the first time I've ever shown this video. This just came out, and I just think it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So let's take a look.
Hi, this is a letter which me and my classmate wrote to access to Wikipedia for free. It goes as follows.
Open letter to Cell C, MTN, Vodacom, and ATAL.
We are learners in grade 12 at Silinjong High School, Joe Slovo Park, Milnerton, Cape Town.
We recently heard that in some other African countries like Kenya and Uganda,
cell phone providers are offering their customers free access to Wikipedia.
We think this is a wonderful idea and would really like to encourage you also to make the same offer here in South Africa.
Our school does not have a library.
90% of us have cell phones, but it is expensive for us to buy airtime.
So if we could get free access to Wikipedia,
it will make a huge difference to us.
Normally, when we do research, Wikipedia is one of the best sites.
And there is information on just about every topic.
Think of the boost that it will give us as students and to the whole education system of South Africa.
Our education system needs help, and having access to Wikipedia would make a very positive difference. Thank you.
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 Thank you. Thank you.
English. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great. Cool. So we think we'll probably be signing some deals in South Africa soon, because I don't know how anybody could resist that video. So this is an era when, all around the world, in every obscure part of the world, Wikipedia has become part of the infrastructure. It's part of how we live our lives today. And I think one of the interesting things that raises for us is the question of who writes Wikipedia? Who are the people who are providing all this information and everything? So why do we want to know who Wikipedians are? Here's why. This is a quote from Twitter. This woman says, "Yesterday I asked one of my students if she knew what an encyclopedia is, and she said, is it something like Wikipedia?" So if you think about a student today who is, say, 16 years old, Wikipedia is 12 and a half years old. So a 16-year-old today, that means Wikipedia has existed from the time when they were just learning how to read. Wikipedia was always there. And certainly in the last 5 years, which would be the age when they would really start using the internet a lot to do their homework or just to follow their own interests, Wikipedia has been ubiquitous. It's been really part of the fabric. And so for that next generation coming up of 16-year-olds, Wikipedia is like air or water. It's something that's always been here. It's something that they rely on. And so it's really important. We have a huge moral responsibility to make sure that Wikipedia is very high quality, that it's accurate, that it's neutral, that it's uplifting in the sense of helping people build their minds and their knowledge of the world. So let's talk about some of the demographic data on who's writing Wikipedia. So one of the things that we see is that Wikipedia editors are about 87% male. That's kind of similar to this room, I'm sorry to say. And it's probably that way for a similar reason. One of the things about Wikipedia is that it is technically challenging to edit. So I'm always very careful to say, I'm not saying women aren't good at computers. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. My father doesn't edit Wikipedia, despite the fact that he's kind of an amateur expert on 1960s era sports cars, muscle cars. But if he clicks on edit, he's 70 years old, he clicks on edit and he sees wiki markup language, editing codes. He doesn't know what to do, and he doesn't have the energy or the time or the background to learn how to do that. And so he's a nice person like most people are, so he hits the back button and he doesn't edit Wikipedia. The only people who do edit Wikipedia are tech geeks, and tech geeks tend to be overwhelmingly male. And so this is a problem that we're really looking to solve. We've got a lot of investment in our visual editor. And when people say, well, what will Wikipedia look like in 5 years' time? What will be different? I say, look, as a reader, it's going to be very similar to what it is today. It's an encyclopedia. It works very well as it is. But as an editor, it will be substantially improved, substantially different, as you'll be able to edit without having to learn wiki markup language, which is really quite important. The average age of our editors is about 26. We've got about double the percentage of PhDs compared to the general public. That doesn't mean that Wikipedia is written mostly by PhDs. It just means that there's quite a few in the community, and you would expect that. It's a pretty geeky hobby to edit an encyclopedia, so you would imagine that people who are subject area experts would find it quite interesting and intriguing. I'm going to show you one more video, and here what I want to do is introduce you to some of the Wikipedia volunteers. It's really easy. Wikipedia can be... we have that very serious tone, and it's very dry and so on, very authoritative style. Even when we don't know what we're talking about, we have an authoritative style. And the result is it's hard sometimes to imagine the human element, the people behind Wikipedia. And I think what I want to introduce is to say, let's take a look at the people of Wikipedia. We're going to meet a few of them in the video, and then really talk about issues of governance and how do we make sure that when people are using this kind of collaborative tools, how do we make sure that they're producing good quality work, and how do we resolve conflicts that inevitably arrive whenever you've got people involved. So here's this video showing some of the volunteers that we want you to meet.
At all? No.
All right, hold on. It's a good opening line, so I'm going to go back and start that over again.
No, I don't have superpowers. At all. No. You could totally do it.
I pushed the button and saved the text. Woo! It was exciting.
You just changed Wikipedia. You just added your own contribution to Wikipedia.
I read an article in The Guardian about this online encyclopedia which everybody can contribute to, and I thought, whoa, maybe I can contribute too as well.
I edited the first time and I think I got addicted to it. I don't get paid anything. I just do it for, something to do in my free time, that's it.
You may start doing it for an idea because you believe in it, but you end up with friends, you end up with lovers, you end up with wonderful discussions, you end up with new ideas, you end up with the new books you're going to write.
You're not writing the article alone. You write a piece and somebody else goes like, hey, I have more, and together you can create articles that are pages long, which you can't by yourself.
Then you have success. You always see, okay, what I've done was successful, and this is great, because so editing is a great feeling every time you do it.
As I say, when I read about Wikipedia, I decided that this is maybe where I would fit in, and I did.
Great. So the interesting thing, this is the community. These are the people who are writing Wikipedia. And when you go to visit Wikipedia, everything that you see is created by this community. Even when you go to the front page and you see the article of the day or the photo of the day, all the selections are made by the editing community. There is no one at the foundation, the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the nonprofit that I set up to own and operate Wikipedia, whose job it is to manage the content of Wikipedia. That is all handled by the community. And the foundation has just over 150 employees, but it's the 100,000 volunteers who matter. The 150 employees, what are they involved with? Well, it's the software developers who are creating the MediaWiki software that we use. It's the ops team, the people who actually keep the website running, which is a big part of making sure that we're successful. We've got finance, accounting, legal, fundraising, the usual back office functions of a nonprofit organization. And we've got, some community liaison people and some people who are doing outreach work and things like that. But everything that you see is really the product of the community. And I think this is really interesting because this community of a relatively small number of people, 100,000 people say, but it's really probably 2,000 or 3,000 who are the really active, the real core community. They've been able to create something acting as volunteers that the entire world is using. And I think that because of this, it's a bit surprising and it's a bit hard to understand how that is even possible, because in most environments, when you get people online, they end up just in huge quarrels and long flame wars, and nothing of good ever comes of it. And a lot of businesses are now using different kinds of tools of collaboration. This has become a phenomenon, not just wiki software, but all kinds of software, where people are collaborating more and people are working more with partners and things like this in new ways. And I think it does require new governance principles and values. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do it, in the hopes that some of the lessons here, some of them are a little bit surprising, are something that you can think about and apply in your own context. So one of the basic principles is that Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. And so what do we mean by this? Well, an encyclopedia offers a summary of human knowledge with the depth of material depending on the context. So there are many things that Wikipedia is not. Wikipedia is not a library. Wikipedia is not a textbook. Wikipedia is not YouTube. So as much as I love a funny cat video, it doesn't belong in Wikipedia. What the more broader principle here is that because Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, it gives this community a central goal and a target that everybody can understand and agree on. If I say an encyclopedia article about the Eiffel Tower in Paris, everyone in this room has pretty much the same idea of what that's supposed to be like. It should tell the history. It should tell when it was built, where it was built, why it was built, what was the cultural impact. What it won't tell you, because it's an encyclopedia article, it won't tell you, the 5 best restaurants nearby. That's a travel guide. It won't tell you the 50 best jokes about the Eiffel Tower. That's a joke book. It's an encyclopedia article, and that really helps the community to focus their minds. So one of the first principles that I think is very broadly applicable is that you really need to have an objective that everyone understands. If people try to collaborate and they're not sure where they're going, it ends up going in circles or being a mess. So it takes some leadership there. In POV, neutral point of view, the idea here is that Wikipedia itself should not take a stand on any controversial topic. I alluded to this earlier, but it's worth taking a moment to think about it again. If you think about a very controversial topic like abortion, for example, where you would say, if you can imagine a kind and thoughtful Catholic priest and a kind and thoughtful family planning advocate, they are never going to agree on the fundamental topic of abortion and whether it should be legal or not or what have you. But what they can come to understand and they can agree on is that Wikipedia should have a neutral entry about it. And so while the Wikipedia entry shouldn't say and can't say abortion is a sin, it can say the Catholic Church position on abortion is that it's a sin, and the Pope has said this, and critics have responded in this way. And if you get those two kind and thoughtful people together and they're working together, what they can do, and we see this all the time in Wikipedia, is create something that they can both point to and say, yes, we're proud of this work. If you come and read this work, you will understand the issue that we disagree about. And that's a huge step forward. It's a huge progress. There was an amazing article just recently in the New York Times about Chinese Wikipedia, talking about Taiwanese Wikipedians and mainland Wikipedians. And what was really funny to me, I've told a story for years about this young kid in Taiwan. I was in Taiwan, and he's a young Wikipedia editor, and the group there that were hosting me, they had assigned him to drive me around. So he drove me around to all my media interviews and everything all day. So I got to know him a little bit, and we were talking and chatting. And he was telling me that he used to think of the mainland Chinese as like robots, that they were brainwashed by the communists. They knew nothing about history. They had everything wrong because he was raised in a very nationalist Taiwanese household. He went on to say, he said, well, now I've been working with a lot of them in Wikipedia and made some friends there. And, well, I still think they're wrong about a lot of things, but I can kind of see where they're coming from. And so it's that small step forward that I think is the step forward towards peace, that step forward where you say, actually, I disagree with you, but I see you as a human being. And that's something that the internet can really help a lot with, and that this idea of neutrality can really help a lot with. So what was interesting to me, there was just this great story in the New York Times all about Chinese Wikipedia, and they told in the story, completely unrelated, about a young guy in mainland China who talked about Taiwan, and he said, oh, I always thought of the Taiwanese as warmongers who were just waiting for their chance to attack us. And then now I feel more tolerant. I've actually learned some history. I've learned some different perspectives on pieces of history. And I just think that's a wonderful and amazing thing that's a part of our community and ends up being in the fabric of this community as we work together, is this idea that we're building something that can be helpful in a lot of these major issues. Free licensing, so this is the open source concept, that everything we do is freely licensed. So this means in order to be freely licensed, obviously it all has to be legally correct. So we respect other people's copyrights. Even though we give all our work for free, we have very strong rules against plagiarism. And what's interesting about this is that there's both a legal and a purely moral component to this. The legal component is we want it to be reusable. We want people to be able to do things like in Argentina there's a project where they burn Wikipedia into CD-ROMs, DVD-ROMs to distribute to schools. And we want them to be able to do that, a group of volunteers, without facing a lot of legal risk that they're carrying out copyright violations. But on the other hand, there's also just the purely moral component, that we can look at Wikipedia, we can point to it and say, look, whatever complaints you have about Wikipedia, whatever's wrong with Wikipedia, and there's a lot wrong with Wikipedia, we made it ourselves, and we're really proud of that. We built it, it was really hard, and we made it ourselves. So our community really is very passionate about some of these principles. Civility, this is one of the core principles of the Wikimedia community. The idea is no personal attacks. So as we work together, you shouldn't attack other people. You should be nice, you should be friendly, you should be trying. Now, of course, we're human beings, so I can't tell you people don't get in fights in Wikipedia. They do. But the core idea here is that what we reject is the idea that Wikipedia should end up neutral because it's a battleground, and basically the forces battle each other to a standstill, and somehow you end up with neutrality. That's not the right spirit for Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not a battleground. It's not about insulting people. It's not about beating people in an argument. It's about collaborating, working together to find what we can agree on and to note and describe what we disagree about. And finally, one of the most surprising rules is ignore all rules. There are no firm rules of Wikipedia. And the idea here is that we want to be really careful to not be too structured and static in our thinking. If somebody comes along with a new idea and says, look, I think this rule is mistaken. I think this rule, we're getting it wrong here, and here's why. That we should always be open to that. And we are generally, although as we are a community that's now 12 years old, sometimes this is something that we do struggle with. We've got a group of really experienced editors who, if you show up and you have a perennial rejected idea and say, ooh, I have this idea, why don't we do this? They'll all sort of roll their eyes and go, right, we've been discussing it for years and we've decided 100 times not to do that, so go away, we don't want to talk about it. In any group, it's a very difficult thing to manage. It's a very difficult thing to structure. How many businesses have crashed and burned on that kind of error in thinking. And nobody ever voluntarily says, you know, I'm planning to destroy the world that I'm trying to create by refusing to consider new information. Nobody ever consciously does that. But in groups, it's very easy to do that. And so it's really important that we always explicitly talk about it and explicitly think about change and how hard it can be to change when everybody thinks, oh, we already thought about that. We're not going to think about it one more time. So our community structure is quite interesting. One of the things that is important to know is that Wikipedia is not an anarchy. So a lot of people have the model of Wikipedia of this idea of like wisdom of the crowds or crowdsourcing. And some of the bad ways of thinking about that are if people imagine that Wikipedia is 100 million people each add one sentence each and somehow it becomes an encyclopedia. And that model doesn't really very well describe how Wikipedia functions. Within Wikipedia, there is a structure. There is a whole set of social structures within the community that are there to drive at quality, to drive at harmony within the community. So one of them is consensus, the idea that we always try to reach consensus on an article, meaning we try to avoid voting. One of the proposals that people used to make a lot is, oh, maybe we should solve some of our problems by having more voting. Maybe we could just vote on different versions of the article. But the problem with voting is that if you look around the room and whatever the threshold is, let's say it's 2/3, and you see 70% support for your position, you can just dig in your heels. You don't have to further compromise. But if 30% of these kind and thoughtful Wikipedians have a complaint about an article, there's almost always a better way. There's a way to rewrite it one more time, to tweak some words, to change some part, to bring in new sources that will make more people happy and more people accepting of the article. So that's our first thing that we always try to do. We try to reach consensus. We have some elements of democracy, of voting. I gave the example earlier of the Eiffel Tower. Well, when you imagine that hypothetical article about the Eiffel Tower, you can imagine there will be a picture in the upper right-hand side. And there will only be one picture in the upper hand. We may have a gallery of photos below, but which picture do we put there? Oh dear, we've got several different pictures. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are nighttime, daytime. Which one should we use? And one has to be chosen. You can't really compromise by merging them in Photoshop or something. It just doesn't work. So we'll have a vote. But even these votes tend to be non-binding votes. People will say, let's just take a straw poll. And then it turns out that's just another way of getting to consensus. People look around and they go, I think picture B is better, but it seems like everybody's voting for A, so I'm just going to drop it. It's not worth fighting about. And so the democracy and the voting is another way that we get at consensus. We have a little bit of aristocracy in the community. This is the senior editors, the people who've been around for a long time. The formal designation of this would be the administrators. They're elected by the community, but once elected, it's very hard to lose your adminship in Wikipedia. And there's some good reasons for that. Administrators sometimes have to make unpopular decisions to enforce the rules. They sometimes have to make decisions that people are going to scream about. So it's important that they have a little bit of safety in what they're doing. That isn't to say that they're, sort of feudal landlords or something like that. There are checks and balances. But there is a certain sense that if you're a deeply experienced Wikipedian and you've been through a lot and you know a lot, that your word will count for more than somebody who just shows up for the first time. This can be sometimes frustrating to newcomers, and again, it's something we always have to be careful about. And finally, there's a little bit of monarchy in the community. This is my role.